Hi, this is John Van Lunen, and you are listening to Treasures of the Outer Banks. In this podcast, we talk to people who live on the Outer Banks, and through their stories, we'll explore what makes this place so special. So if you downloaded this podcast to find out where the gold is hidden, my apologies. But if you want to meet the people we treasure on this sandbar, stick around. I'm sure you'll enjoy their stories of history, local personalities, and community. I've known Meghan Agresto for about 5 years. I coached her oldest son in lacrosse at First Flight High School. Like most of the relationships I have with lacrosse parents, ours was very casual. To be frank, I had no idea what she did for a living. Had I known a long time ago, I probably would have talked to her a lot more because it's fascinating. This talk is total gold. She knows everything you need to know about the Currituck Lighthouse and the surrounding area. She's obviously a big part of the community. She's embraced it, and I think they've embraced her in return. She holds a couple titles. She is the site manager for the Currituck Lighthouse compound, which has a few buildings as well as the lighthouse. And that is run by a nonprofit organization called the Outer Banks Conservationists. She is also president for the board of directors for the Water's Edge Village School, which is a charter school for the young people in Corolla. I think you're going to love this interview. Her energy is off the charts, and I think we had a great conversation. I'm already planning my next interview with her, and I hope to touch upon the two female hitchhikers that she picked up a long time ago. We got to get to the bottom of that. But sit back and relax and enjoy this talk with Meghan Agresto, Currituck Lighthouse.
And how was it lugging that kite up and down the sand dunes all day?
Okay, so I loved that part of it. I liked teaching. The minimum wage at that time was not excellent, and we had to carry that thing 25 times up. I think it was 5 flights, 5 people. I can't remember exactly, but in 2 hours. So was I in amazing shape? Yes. Did I have to get 2 other jobs to just pay rent? Did I leave the Outer Banks that summer with not $1 more than I came with? Yes. All I did was work until 3 a.m. I worked at George's Junction, made their desserts at some point, and waited tables at the Blue Moose, which doesn't exist anymore either, which is now Hurricane Moe's.
Okay.
On 12. But seriously, we used to have bake sales during the day to try to make more money just to pay.
Do you remember what year this was?
Summer 96, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
I got here summer 97.
Wait, hold on. No, it was the summer I turned 21. Because on my 21st birthday, we went to that. There used to be like this falling apart amusement park.
Yes.
And there was some
on the bypass?
On the bypass. And there was we decided to go ride a ride, and he wouldn't turn it off. He was drinking. It was such a wild 21st. I wasn't even drinking. He wasn't. He wouldn't let us off the ride. And we were the only people on the ride. It was like absolutely on its way down. Nice. So if I was born in 74, it must have been somewhere in 95.
Okay. Gotcha. And so it got in your blood? The Outer Banks?
A little. I didn't want to leave. Right. I was like, but I see the ocean every day. I can't leave. And then I left, and then life was fine too, which I think some people on the Outer Banks forget. We get so used to being like, oh, the water. But then in 2005, a job came open here at the Currituck Beach Lighthouse. And I was like, but that's my job. Like working at the lighthouse, it was a combination of what I felt was everything I was good at.
The history and all this stuff.
Yeah, so the history and the nonprofit aspect of it, which is the only 2 things I had done, and minus washing dishes in Alaska. It was those 2 things, I guess, and teaching hang gliding. But I felt like that was a combination of my professional skills. And
so dishwasher was not real high on the resume?
Dishwasher was the worst job ever. Although it's funny, because I was 22, I washed dishes for a summer in Alaska. But now I tell all the restaurants out here, you want me to wash dishes for a night? Call me. I'll wash your. I got it now. Give me a job I don't have to think about every now and then. But so I actually approached the board, the Outer Banks Conservationists board, and said, hey, you don't know me, but I hear you have a job opening. And Luis and I, who came together at the time we had 1 child, said, together we make a great pair for you, because he's got the building and grounds stuff together. I've got the operational personality, can boss people around if need be, or do the research if you want, write for you, whatever that side of the operation is.
Did you get a degree in history?
I have a degree in the classics department from Carolina in ancient Greek translation. It was only somebody
how's
could
that
have
going
said.
for you right now?
Someone really could have said. I actually ended up spending a year in Spain. Also, I dropped out and spent a year in Greece. I didn't know what I was doing, so whatever was fascinating for me is which is still true today, right? If I'm
You're like me. You're always that squirrel looking for.
right, not even looking. No, I'm not ever looking. But if something comes my way and it's fascinating, then I'm like, all right, I'm in. I'm fully in.
Cool.
So I felt like that was a lot of research and history anyway
Sure.
that put together, an appreciation, not to be glib, but that people who are now dead were once alive and that they have things to offer us, and
Sure.
we will be them one day as well, and so let's figure it out and learn more.
Right. So you talked your way into a job.
We talked our way into this job, and then we ended up having a second son while we were here. We were living in the keeper's house, and then real life happened. Then they needed to go to school, and
Right.
Corolla had a school dearth,
Yeah.
or also no school. And
Did you ever entertain driving all the way back to the mainland to take your kids to class?
No, there is a bus. There has always been a bus. I was just not going to put a 5-year-old for 4.5 hours on a bus every day, right? And actually, at the time, then I was able to convince Currituck to give the per student allotment to Dare. It's just there was a difference in tuition. So we ended up paying for public school and driving back and forth twice a day, which really cut into work up here. So that's where the idea of starting a school
Right.
came up, which takes way more time than just listening to the radio and driving to Kitty Hawk. But that's a whole different story.
Yeah. And I was reading about that venture that you and Sylvia Wolf,
You got it.
creating this school. It's just amazing. Yeah.
Somebody probably should have been.
Has it been a labor of love, or
It has been a labor of love. I mean, I don't have kids who go to that school anymore. I've got a kid in college right now.
Yeah.
And I still, if you look at that pile right there, I put a lot of time into making sure we're trying to build an additional building now. So that's a $1.35 million capital campaign.
Right.
We've already hit $1 million.
Nice.
So, and just really talking to people about need and what our commissioner yesterday called skin in the game. I feel like when it comes to that in education for kids up here, we've got that. And
Right. Yeah. You're motivated to keep the kids here instead of wasting all that time on the highway.
absolutely, right? And it just allowed for people who work here already to not have to move. Now that's changed a little bit because now people with second homes like the idea of coming to a school here. That's a different thing. That's a different group of people than we started with, which was essentially you work at the gas station, you work at that restaurant, you're part of the ocean rescue, and you have a kid. You don't have to just cross county lines to get to Dare County schools.
Right. Yep. Make the community a better community.
Or a more year-round vibrant community. It doesn't mean that that's a welcome change necessarily to the people who want this to be an occupancy tax generating town alone. But it turns out that that's short-sighted. You can't just generate occupancy tax without people to work there, which means you need people with houses and you need them to want to stay.
So what's the name of the organization that owns and runs this whole facility here?
Sure, the lighthouse is actually owned by the Outer Banks Conservationists, and we lease the property inside the fence from the state of North Carolina, and the Coast Guard maintains our active public aid to navigation. The beacon at the top is Coast Guard controlled because we continue to shine every night.
Wow. Okay. Does that keep you up at all?
Not a bit. But it's funny, I do know it hardly has ever gone dark, but I can tell, and Luis can tell immediately. You just walk outside and every 17 seconds of darkness will be followed by 3 seconds of light. And we now know what 18 seconds of darkness feels like. You're like, oh, something has gone wrong. Yeah. Did someone accidentally switch the fuse? Which sometimes the docents who work here, if they're
unplugged
in a rush to go.
Accidentally tripped over the extension cord.
There's no extension cord. It's just a fuse. But we do shut all our fuses off at night, except for that one. It's the way to turn the fans and the lights off. But that one has, on occasion, been accidentally turned off.
That's funny.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what was the
Outer Banks Conservationists.
Conservation, and they own the school, and do they help?
No. So that's a separate nonprofit.
You lease the property to run that school, and that's a separate nonprofit.
That's a separate nonprofit, and actually we don't. The Twitty family owns that building. Well, I guess
because it got relocated a long time ago.
no. That
No?
schoolhouse
Okay.
that schoolhouse was built in the 1890s with permission from the federal government. Written or the request was made by lighthouse keepers to and I don't know if that meant funding because I only have this receipt from the National Archives that says go ahead and approve this request. So, and it was obviously approved because the school is there, but I don't have any receipts. And we know that a man whose last name is Sanderling
Right.
helped build it. He was a surfman,
Right.
right? A longtime surfman. So we know that and the school was for both lighthouse keepers' kids and surfmen's families.
Right.
So
Was
it
there a
makes sense.
surfman's rescue station right here?
Right here. So that actually predates the lighthouse. 1874, that opens. And the lighthouse isn't operational until the end of 1875.
Okay.
And there were, of course, more life-saving stations than there were lighthouses.
They were like every 7 miles or
exactly,
something like that.
Yep. Yeah, initially even farther, right? And so
Right,
it's
I heard
the
that,
wreck of the
yeah.
metropolis that brings national attention to the Outer Banks to say, that never should have happened. Why was the next station so far away? Why did
Where
they
was
have to
the
travel so
metropolis?
far? The metropolis happens right off. That's 1878. That's right off these shores.
These shores.
I think January 31st. Not that it matters, but right middle of the winter, miserable and failed. I mean, some people survive. In fact, they all spend a lot of them, 80 some odd, spend a weekend in the keeper's house overnight, breakfast, overnight again. They must have been. It must have been a mess. Think of the trauma, the mourning, the looking for the dead.
Yeah.
And trying to feed them when you're usually just feeding.
Yeah.
At that time, there are about 22 people living in the keeper's house. So big families start here initially, or at least by 1880. There's a lot. The census tells us there's a lot of 3 families. So the lighthouse station, well, the lighthouse itself is operated by 3 keepers' families. And at the time, the keeper's house was the only dwelling was a duplex. So the principal keeper had his own side with his family. And the other side houses 2 keepers' families living
Why
together.
was it 3 families? Was there just that much work that they had to revolve?
Yeah. So what we understand is that the one keeper would go up half an hour before sunset and slowly get everything ready, open the curtains, slowly light the light. There was concentric wicks. You didn't want it to get too hot too quickly on the lamp, which initially is lard oil. And then that person would work till midnight, and then the second person would replace him and work until, but you can't do that 7 days a week. I mean, you could, but that's unkind to force your workers to work 7 nights a week, third shift. And so there was always a third person. Somebody had to sail across the sound to the post office. Somebody had to sick somebody. You needed a third person. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. Polish the brass, make sure. So the lighthouse, has to work 24 hours a day. And Cape Henry to the north and Body Island to the south, they have to have a different beacon at night, right? During the daytime, they're painted differently, or in our case, unpainted.
Right.
But at night, if everyone's burning oil, you're just going to look like a bright light at night. That's unhelpful to mariners. You have to create something unique. And in our case, it was a matter of lifting up a weight around a drum, releasing it, having it controlled by a governor so it didn't plummet to the bottom. And that rotated 3 flash panels around not solid, but steady, an unmoving lens and prisms. And that was on a wheeled apparatus that went around the
it would
lens.
kind of have a man-made flash of some
Exactly.
sort.
Yeah, gravity powered.
Yeah.
But then that's got a whole cable down the tower. If that gets gunked up, somebody's got to, you're not allowed to let this light go out. So you've got to make sure that's working.
Right. Wow.
And that's a complicated system, or that's a system, just because you crank it every 2.5 hours. Sometimes they call it a cable, but sometimes they call it a chain, what the weight is attached to. So I can imagine the machinery on that could be hard to fix if something got tangled. It's a massively heavy system.
Right. And you're not associated with the hunt club next door?
No, the Whalehead Club.
Whalehead
Right,
Club.
right. So that's not built till 1920 or the early 1920s it takes to build that.
Right.
And I really sometimes think about the Outer Banks as before the Wright brothers fly and after the Wright brothers fly.
Okay.
And I consider that to be people know we're on the map. at that
Okay,
point,
right.
right? The hunt clubs are showing up. Although there are hunt clubs before the Wright brothers fly, but that really becomes afterwards a let's come down, let's essentially vacation in the wintertime, which is the exact opposite from how humans are these days, right? We're dead in the wintertime around here.
You know, it's funny, interviewing Waikiki Wise in a podcast, and he made the observation, and I don't know if this was his own observation or what, but he said, historically, humans don't go to the ocean shore to go hang out. And if you think about the settlements on this beach, we didn't go straight to the shore. People didn't go straight to the shore. They went on the sound side. There was wooded areas. It was a little bit protected from wind and waves.
Dead people wash up on the beach. Right? That's the whole point, is this lighthouse is here to try to stop that from happening. But we know in the first 10 years of these lighthouse keepers being here, they're burying people. Along the poles, on the pole road that goes to the telegraph station. They're burying them because all of those poles are numbered. So if you want to find the body again to return it, that's how you find, because otherwise if you just put it in a body in a dune, you're never going to find it. It's like finding a wedding ring. You're not going to find it on the beach.
Were the surf rescue guys keeping a record of all this
Yes,
stuff?
and then if, for instance, the Italian dead have to go, be shipped back to Italy or whatever, I don't think that happened, but, if it's a closer death, then a lot of times you'll return the body to have it buried at home. So and even our lighthouse keeper's house, the front of it, even though it's such a beautiful house, it looks beautiful from the back too, but the front of it faces the Currituck Sound because that's where life was, right? You wanted to go to a bar, you wanted to go to church, you wanted to go to the post office. You would sail across the Sound to do that. That was life. That was danger, right? Yeah, he's definitely, that is no doubt about. Well, also, until infrastructure comes with the Wright Brothers Memorial Bridge, the Wright Memorial Bridge, this is a maritime world. You got around through. That's why there were so many lighthouses, little screw pile lighthouses in our waters, right? Everything. There were so many and when we think about our lighthouse keepers, this is not, we hold them in high esteem, but whether they held the Currituck Beach Lighthouse, this is one of 14 lighthouses they might have served at, right? They go from tower to tower or from station to station as part of their job, either promotions or just changes. And their lives just really rotate on the water here. And that's all the Outer Banks is, right? It's fishing, it's hunting, and it's getting around on boating or even eventually ferries. Elizabeth City had ferries coming down to Nag's Head, right? Or to Roanoke Island. It was a maritime world, which is so interesting because now someone's trying to give me a sailboat. And another person was like, don't take the sailboat. You don't have but 2 inches there. What are you going to do with your sailboat in Corolla? Don't take it. It's just going to mess up your yard. It's just such a different world now that there are bridges and roads.
Yep. I've seen that in my research as well. I've been doing a lot of reading about that local history, and it falls right off.
Yeah, it's a complete different life.
When they started building highways and roads, just the whole maritime thing just dries up.
Once you build a road, you have to build the dunes because you cannot have washover on your road because roads are very expensive. So once you build dunes, you have to get rid of the cattle, right? And so what used to be really like a cow island, I think Body Island used to get called Cow Island. Right. All of that sort of changes. I mean, that might not be the only change. Breeding cattle for specific characteristics also becomes a thing, but which you can't do if you let them free range. But it's an incredible change on the Outer Banks since this lighthouse has been built. Right.
So you've done a lot of research. Are there any particular families that fascinate you that were here at the lighthouse?
Yes. Well, the Austin family I think we have at least 4 keepers with the last name Austin, but sometimes they'll swear they're not related to each other, which I think happens when you have so few real families on the, and one is the Outer Banks were so isolated, right? So you have the Tillotts, you have the Austins, you have just a few last names. But then, oh no, I'm going to lose my train of thought. Hold on, what is those families? Things? Right, but what was I going to say? You have families that are isolated on the Outer Banks, but you also have, and I guess I could call it this, the nepotism of the lighthouse service, right? Where your dad was a lighthouse keeper and then you get into the business. And that might just be because there's so few people out here. But even across the United States, you can see that the lighthouse service is very family integrated, right? Like they're grandparents and fathers and sons who get the jobs.
Right.
So there is a guy who I adore, and I don't know why I'm forgetting his last name. I might have to look it up if we like him too much. But just some storytellers here. One guy who swore he witnessed cannibalism out at sea, that there was a wreck and they had to tie themselves to the mast, right? Because they couldn't, I mean, that's the other thing about the ocean being a place of danger, is that there's no YMCA for everybody to get swim lessons, right?
Right.
You know, like, there's no guarantee that all of these
50-50,
people could swim a 50-meter, right? And also you wouldn't in a major storm in January. You're going to have trouble getting in. So one of our lighthouse keepers tells a story of how he witnessed a ship's captain and cook tie themselves to a mast for 4 days. And then when the storm stops, the cook is dead. And so he goes over and slits the throat of the cook and drinks the blood because he still can't get in. So there are some story. Is that lore? Is that true? Could be true. Why would, I don't know that you would make, that's a pretty fantastic story. I don't know that you could even make, I don't know.
Right.
So we have lighthouse keepers who cannot get along initially. One who served in the Civil War, or who was conscripted by the North because he knew the waterways. And so when our lighthouse isn't built until after the Civil War. So you better be a declared Republican to work here, right? But then if you, from the locals' perspective, looks like maybe you were a traitor, so that can be complicated. And then, as I mentioned, 2 families are living on the north side of the house. And so if you're not getting along and you have all sorts of kids, right? There's no great birth control methods out here, right? And you're living with your family, you can have a lot of kids. And then somebody might have died and you took your niece on, right? There's a lot of people in this house. And so when you work for the federal government and you don't get along, you get written up. And then you have to explain yourself. And we are told that your wife poisoned the dog of the other lighthouse keeper. And so in the right after this lighthouse opens through the early 1880s, there's a lot of drama going on. And the funny thing is, after they get rid of those families, because again, these families move from site to site, they hire 3 bachelors. I'm like, I don't think that was unintentional.
Everything got a lot more simple.
And then for a while we have brothers who were here, and that seems to work well for a long time. But one eventually gets sent to Ocracoke, where he serves and then he eventually dies there. So, and Ocracoke at the time is not easy. It's not easy to get to Ocracoke today. If I go to Ocracoke on a day trip, I am exhausted by the time I get home. But all of these are, in some ways, the lighthouse keeper who means the most to us is Homer Treadwell Austin. He's our last oil-carrying lighthouse keeper. And it's his great-grandson who works in the late 1970s to found the nonprofit, the Outer Banks Conservationists, to save the keeper's house. That keeper's house was built 4 times in the United States, and it's the only one still standing. Right? It was built, it was a prefab.
They copied it. Okay. They prefabbed it. Wow.
They prefab, at least ours, we know at Lazaretto Point in Baltimore. Wow. There's a newspaper article talking about the framing of this house there. And you can see when you get into the attic, the framing, it's like A1 and A2. Like all the beams are meant just to be repositioned.
Right.
But that's true for 2 lighthouses in South Carolina, and a replica of this house is also there, neither of which exist, and one in California, which was intentionally demolished in the 60s.
Now, when you lived in the house, was it good to go, or did it need a lot of work?
No, it had a lot of work. We don't move into the house until 2005, and so the nonprofit had no money when they start here, right? They celebrated getting of a grant. I think it was $1,500 to help out. So they are here working in the summer times, right? Like working on the wood, taking off these things, trying to find enough money to send them off to get
professionally restored.
Exactly. But a lot of the restoration work is done by them. They've got skills, right? Even today, that's John Wilson, who's the great-grandson of Homer Treadwell Austin. Wow. He has an incredible eye. He's an artist, but he's also an architect. And he had found the architectural plans for this house in the National Archives. So there were plans to follow, which allowed that to happen. But it's the good work done on that house that causes the Coast Guard to say, hey, by the way, the Coast Guard doesn't get the lighthouse group or the lighthouse establishment until 1939. right? And it's a little bit unwilling. They have a job to do, and they didn't want it to be building preservation. But you have to preserve the building to keep the light at the top, right? Because that's cast iron in a maritime environment. It's going to rust. If you let it rust, and if you don't care for your brick or your mortar, you're going to have trouble. So Coast Guard says, hey, look, you've done incredible work the past 10 years on that house. Wouldn't you like to lease this tower? We'll keep it going as an active aid to navigation. You lease the building and open it to the public, get the money to do all the renovations on it. So that was how that agreement started initially, which is the Outer Banks Conservationists leased that building from the federal government. And then in the early 2000s, the Congress passes a law called the United States Historic Lighthouse Preservation Act. What is it called? Historic Lighthouse Preservation Act, something like that, of 2000. I can get that right. Passes a Lighthouse Preservation Act, and we are a sort of a pilot for that to see how well does this work. If we release the building to a nonprofit or a city or a town for free, right? It's excess property. The GSA refers to, marks it as excess property. And then there's an application process. But we had already done all the work on it for 10 years and put a lot of money already into it. So we were actually granted the deed. That becomes a little bit of a mess because then Currituck sues us because they had also applied. The county of Currituck sues the nonprofit that I work for and said, we think you're lawbreakers because we zoned you as residential, but you don't have any bathrooms on site. And as such, you in your application said how many humans you let in a year. So you're obviously against ordinance with running a museum on what you're on zoning that you're not allowed to run a museum. You're going to have to put 30 bathrooms on site. And my organization said, no, we're dedicated to historic preservation. And this is one of the best preserved light stations in America.
Wow.
We're not putting 30 bathrooms right inside our fence. Plus, we already helped build your bathrooms. We already funded the bathrooms right outside our fence. So that went through a lawsuit. That's actually when I came on, when they were pretty sure they might run out of money. So they were like, we have enough money to pay y'all for a year. Do you want to come and work here anyway? And I was like, okay, we'll move for a year. It's fine. But then that eventually was settled. So we do own the tower and the building we're sitting in right now, actually, which is its own interesting story because what happens is in 1937, the lighthouse keepers are all sent away. This lighthouse is electrified in 33, automated in 37. You don't need people doing maintenance if all you need is somebody to come once a week to power your generator for your battery, right? And that'll run for a week. You can get somebody on the mainland to just take a boat over, run it for 8 hours and go home. And so they send the lighthouse keepers on to other jobs, and then eventually they can join the Coast Guard or retire. But people eventually realize in Corolla, these buildings are unused.
Yeah.
Right? Like, wouldn't this cute little storehouse look good in your yard? Okay, well, it's just built on a little brick foundation. Let's just haul it. And so eventually the site starts losing integrity. This building disappears. All the woodwork inside the keeper's house, the windows walk away, the banisters walk away.
Vandalism and theft.
You know, I actually prefer to think of it more as like repurposing.
Okay.
It's clear decade after decade. So by the 1950s, the grounds themselves are given from the federal government to the state of North Carolina. The state of North Carolina has an obligation to maintain this property. They're in Raleigh. They're not coming out. Even when I came out in the 90s, getting to Corolla was really a hard thing to do from Chapel Hill.
Right.
Same from Raleigh. You had to go through
They don't care. Out of sight, out of mind.
Zebulon, exactly. So it does make sense to me that decade after decade of you being like, hey, that's a shame to watch those buildings go. Wouldn't I repurpose that banister somewhere else?
Yeah.
I can understand that mentality. Anything else would be a little bit crazy. But yeah, by the 70s, you do have these Virginians coming down. There's a lot of dune buggying up on Penny's Hill, or even in the 60s, right? It's easy to come down from Virginia Beach. And people are staying in the keeper's house, right? There's graffiti all over it. Marijuana is carved into a wall, people's names up. I mean, again, part of me is like, hey, why not? Doesn't that sound like you'd have a good time? Nobody's paying attention to that building, and we're just coming down for the weekend to have a good time. We're partying. And that is when John Wilson, the great-grandson of Homer Treadwell Austin, says, hey, shouldn't we try to save this house? Currituck apparently at that time was considering burning it down because it was an attractive nuisance. It was going to create some sort of trouble with that kind of usage.
Yeah.
And that's the story of how. So in that sense, to answer your question, a very long way, we do look back to Homer Treadwell Austin, who he served at 14 different places, whether he remembered this one specifically as his best station. A lot of people did think Currituck was their best station because it's on land. You know, there's so many screw pile towers out in Albemarle Sound, all of these sounds near us. That's a bachelor station. You get sent there, you're there for 10 days. Your wife and kids live in Wanchese. They go to school on Roanoke Island. That's sort of where life is.
Right.
And then you're traveling, you're by yourself. You better have the capacity to be solitary and not too mournful, because that's what your life looked like. So this, and again, by the 1890s, we have a school here. We have a post office by 1895 or 1896. So this is a place people really wanted to be. They had kids. They were like, let me go to Currituck Beach Lighthouse. Everything is nearby. And so that is a fact that people really wanted to be here.
Right.
Or Virginia.
What's the name of the guy? Bowden?
Ernie.
Yeah. Ernie Bowden. Do you have any
who
good
just died.
Do you have any good Ernie Bowden stories?
I don't specifically. I knew him only very peripherally. There are a lot of good stories. You know, he's in jail and running. He's either been elected or running for office from jail.
Yep. I heard that one.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of lore when you live that long and have such a cowboy ethos.
Right.
In a place where that's not even an option anymore.
Right.
You know, then
I heard that he would be on horseback with a 6-gun on his hip and just roaming around,
trying to get his buffalo,
looking for his buffalo and whatever herd he had out there. Just the wild, wild west.
You know who you might want to talk to is Clark Twitty, who knew Ernie well. Yeah,
and
he wrote
that book.
Yeah,
didn't he?
Yeah, I mean, I think he wrote the book from an interview that he didn't actually conduct, right? The interview had been done.
Oh, really?
I think 2009, 2010. He gathered it and put it together and put it with photos. But I think he also knew Ernie well.
Right. So, and I'm jumping around. We can always come back to some of these topics, but you've been here a while. You're a historian. I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff here. What's the coolest thing you have found here while you've been here? And maybe it was something on the beach, maybe it was a piece of paper, maybe it was a person. I mean, what's the coolest thing you've found?
Probably let's not talk about the 2 female hitchhikers I picked up once.
Whoa.
No, right? I was like, women hitchhiking, I should be helpful here. Woo! There might have been. Anyway, I'm a big believer in hitchhiking. It's not really a thing that happens on the Outer Banks, particularly not with SnapMap anymore, because kids don't need to hitchhike anymore. But when I was a kid, I thought it was awesome. Right. Anyway, when you say what are the most interesting people you've ever picked up, those 2 come right to mind. But that is not the story I was thinking of. In 2010, actually, ECU, the Maritime, who was it? Maybe it was the state, actually, called me and said, hey, someone has found a really interesting shipwreck right off the lighthouse. Can you take one of the yellow tags we left you and just go tag it? Just put this yellow tag on it that indicates the state knows about it and we'll be out there soon to check it out. And that, in fact, Ray Miggs, who you and I had been talking about earlier, who was a Roanoke Islander with a metal detector, worked on talking to Mark Basnight about, because you're not supposed to take these shipwrecks. The story behind it was really the oldest shipwreck ever found north of Florida on the mid-Atlantic. Wow. It had no metal on it. They figured it was 16th century maybe. Wow. And so that was fun. That was fun for a variety of reasons. One, because it was in such good shape when it first washed out, right? It was all what they call trunnels, which is short for tree nails, right? You put 2 different kinds of wood, a kind of wood nail in your wooden frame that swells and then holds. But what happened is it was still buoyant. And so the storm that exposed it had been exposed earlier. And I guess Ray Midget knew that. But then it was covered with sand again, then it was exposed again, but then it started washing away and breaking up. And so it was just going to disappear, right? It was just going to break up. And so Ray Midget convinced, I think, Baz Knight, that we were allowed to take it off the beach, but we were going to do the work ourselves. So I got Corolla community to really jump. And our fire station came out with we got excavators. We got a guy from Delaware who saw us posting about this come down with a shovel. He just drove down to help. And we ended up getting it on a flatbed, dragging it off the beach here under a tree on Outer Banks Conservationist property. Wow. But then the state said, actually, it really is interesting. We want it at the graveyard of the Atlantic Museum. So then they paid to get it loaded back up and brought down there. Unfortunately, they didn't have the money to preserve it, and it's really falling apart. But if you're ever at the Hatteras Ferry with an hour because you missed the ferry, then you just walk on the backside of that museum, and there's a cement pad back there, and that's the shipwreck.
And you don't have a name for it, and don't have an exact year.
ECU does have a name. They always get named. I think they named it after the guy who found it. But then they did. Before they let it go, they sent maritime history students out to do all the measuring and all the wood research and where could it have come from and is it from Europe, and they got wood experts on it to figure out, was it from Denmark? There's a lot of... Actually, Nathan Richards is a fascinating person to talk to. He is the PhD at ECU now in maritime history. Mm-hmm. Maritime archaeology. He'll be mad at me for not remembering his title or his department. But he knows everything about shipwrecks on the Outer Banks. Also, he's Australian.
Okay. So he'll be fun to talk to.
He is fun. He's great.
I'll try not to mimic his accent.
Try very hard.
I have a bad habit.
A tendency to do that.
Okay, so tell me, again, we're bouncing around. Tell me a little bit about the school and, tell me about the school.
Sure. So Sylvia Wolf, who's actually now the director at our school, had been at a meeting where some commissioner had sort of offhandedly said there's just no need for a school out here, which is true.
Sounds like a challenge.
We took it as a challenge. He did not mean it as a challenge, but it's true. If you don't have a school, then there will not be people to go to the school. It's just, if you don't provide the service.
Chicken and egg.
Exactly. But I wasn't going anywhere. That was sort of my intention. As I mentioned, I could live in Chapel Hill on an upstairs condo above a parking lot, or I could live in Corolla, and I was going to stay. I was staying here. So I was like, all right, well, I've got the energy, and I can make a mean to-do list, right? I know if that's the bear we're trying to get, what baby steps it takes to get there. Right. That's my skill set. Sylvia is a dreamer and an educator, and she also has an incredible amount of energy. So together we made a great thing. She's like, we should do this. I'll be like, here's how we're going to do it. Here's our to-do list. Who got it done? Has it been done yet? So she's got I'm the grump of the group. So that's it.
You're the mean person who makes everybody do work.
Exactly. Or I'll just do it myself. But that's it. We decided to figure out what it took, which meant asking around. First, we just said, hey, Currituck, won't you just give us a substation school? Just send us a teacher or two. Don't give us a principal. We'll get a building for it, and it'll just be a school. It can be Jarvisburg Elementary. They said, absolutely not. You need 70 kids, and then we'll talk. So we had, we opened in 2012 with 15, and some of them were from Dare County. So we did not have 70 students to start off.
Does Dare County... Do those residents contribute?
Yeah, so not personally. Okay. So we ended up looking at, what do you call that? Private school or religious school, just to have a school. Right. But charter school, it turns out, is just a state school, right? So the accreditation is done just by the state rather than a local board of education. So when you get funding from the state like that, there are no county lines. Right, so Dare County students and Currituck, if somebody wanted to come from Moyock, they certainly could, of course. And we've had people get on our lottery from Moyock, because now we're big enough and with little enough space that every year we have a waiting list. Wow. But we had some wild people who thought it would be a good idea, given what we have, that they wanted their student here and not there. But it's just too long of a drive, right? It's just wild to think you want to do that. Unless you work here or have a reason to be here, Corolla's far out. It always has been.
Yeah. I live in Southern Shores, and I had to Google, how many minutes it would take me to get here. It was 36. I thought, I'll get up there in about 20 minutes. Like 36 minutes. Yeah. Holy smokes.
Oh, yeah. 20 minutes from the Hampton Inn. Like every time I have to go, I'm like, how is this Hampton Inn, which is in our county, still so far away? But 36 is right.
Yeah. And can I say, I feel like when I moved in here 25 years ago, I felt like Corolla was just three places. It was the golf course, it was Timbuktu, and it was the lighthouse. And I seem to recall, I kept feeling they're really close together, and they're not.
No.
There's like 8 miles between the southernmost point and the northernmost point.
Well, and don't forget,
you can't walk from one place to the other.
Don't forget the beach. I mean, like the four-wheel drive area, right? Because that goes up to mile plus, I think, 26. So we're 26 miles.
It stretches a lot.
It really, and it's so narrow. I mean, people always say that. Why is the lighthouse built so far from the ocean? Well, one, because it's tall. So, and we have this first order for LN, so it shines really far, but also because it can be, it's a very tiny strip of sand here, so you might as well go smack in the middle of it, right? Might as well not be right on the edge of either side because we're so narrow, so long and so narrow.
Yeah. So what were we talking about? We were talking about the school. We were talking about.
Oh yeah, how did the school happen? Maybe now let me tell me about the story you said.
So you were just talking about the lottery and this, that, and the other thing.
Right.
So.
Well, that we ended up with a charter, right? That's how we decided to do, which is where you have to apply to the state to say here's a compelling reason for us to open this school. And charter schools in the rest of North Carolina are very polarizing because you draw off from a public traditional school. You draw off people, and if you don't provide transportation or a meal, then that can be, you can really end up getting criticized for what ends up to be people who can afford to drive to your school or something. We were the opposite, right? We were a charter school because there was no traditional school here. And if you were going to put your kid on the bus to go to Currituck, you've driven your kid as far as where our school is, right? We're at the Winks, right? We're essentially, which is where the bus stops to take people to Currituck or to the mainland.
Does everybody load there?
They can no, I think they stop another place.
There's like
they'll
two
stop.
or three more spots.
Exactly.
Okay. Which makes sense. I mean, it's already a 2-hour drive or something like that. It's like, why add 20 stops?
Right. And essentially for those kids going to the mainland, this is obviously the first stop. Once they cross over the bridge back into the Currituck mainland, that's when they start real bus stopping.
They do more?
Oh, they pick up everybody.
Well, I guess it would be an empty bus.
It would be an empty bus either, and you can't send a short bus anymore. Apparently, you have to have a full-size bus to go over that bridge. So that's $40,000 a year, they tell me, and that was years ago. I bet it's more now. Yeah. Just to pick up 1 or 2 kids. So we always thought that was insane anyway. We're like, why don't you fund us and we'll do the work for you?
Yeah.
But then, of course, we've run out of space now. So we started with 15. We have 44 students this year. So in our 2-room schoolhouse and also the Corolla Chapel has allowed us to use their fellowship hall.
How many full-time teachers?
We have 6 full-time employees. 1 is a director and 5 licensed teachers. 2 of them special ed educated as well.
Really?
General ed and special ed masters.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they serve to... They can serve 2 populations if needed.
Well, we do. We're a public school, right? We are a public school. We are not allowed to ask any questions of you of any interest. I don't even think we're allowed to ask gender at this point. We say, what's your name? What grade are you going into? What's your birthday? Essentially, to get into our lottery. We draw a pure lottery. We don't care what county you live in. Right. That is on us to be non-discriminatory. Names out of a hat. First and second, kindergarten and first grade get drawn first because that's how we move kids out of one classroom. That's the room with space initially. So we fill our kindergarten and first grade classroom first, and then if there's still spaces, we fill the other classes.
And returning students get priority?
Yeah, you only enter the lottery once if you're coming back, and siblings also get priority. So if you're already in our school and you have a kindergarten brother, that is our first drawing. So.
Right. Okay. And you're sitting at 44 kids, and how soon do you think you can expand? Or is it the construction of a new building dependent upon everything?
It is, in terms of making sure we have everything in order. We've done soil testing. worked with the HOA that has a covenants that controls that spot.
You have a location.
We have a location. It's right next to the schoolhouse. That's donated land to our organization. So there's a lot of support in this town because you realize if you want this infrastructure to be supported, you need families. You need people with houses because otherwise they're going to be driving from Columbia or whatever all day, every day. You say, my house wasn't cleaned on time or whatever. It's because people are driving into Corolla to work.
Yeah.
So the idea that we would have some humans supporting the infrastructure here is important to a lot of people, from the real estate agents to the businesses themselves. A lot of these business owners have kids in our school. So that allows them to be workhorses who work all the time, like the Corolla businesses do.
Yeah. And how have you seen, what kind of evolutions have you seen up here in Corolla?
Well, COVID changed things a lot, and I don't know if that will settle out, but at least during those 2 winters, we saw more people than we've ever seen up here, right? You can count on the seasonality of Corolla, which is something I like about it, because you see 55,000 new people a week in the summertime, right?
Yeah.
And then in the wintertime, you're lucky to see 100 people here. I mean, I know there are more of us on the voting register, but like in the wintertime, you see no one. You want to take a shower naked outside, no one will drive by. No one will know it's happening, right? Absolutely true. And that felt different during COVID. Like they were here.
Ghost
they were
town.
ready. COVID, on the contrary. They moved into their second homes. They were like, what businesses are open year round? What can we do? And so there was more vibrant winter, certainly. But that was a lot of people working. What do we call that? I'm working
remotely.
There was a lot of people working remotely.
Yeah.
And I don't know, once real life returns to other places and cities are more vibrant, whether we're going to compete, whether they're like, actually, I like this year round, or I really liked it as my summertime utopia.
Yeah, I think it's both. I think there's people that just love the convenience of the city. Mm-hmm. And, just different restaurants or everything's there.
Takeout.
Airports, train stations, whatever you need.
Doctors, yeah.
So I think those people will probably migrate back.
Yeah.
And other people that are just happy with it.
Right. Well, and houses are selling for just insane numbers these days, right?
Yeah.
So and I don't know if that's evening out now, but for a while there, if you wanted to get out, that was a great time to do it in terms of selling high.
Right. How often do you leave the beach? Now, I know you had kids in school and...
Oh my gosh, these days it feels like I never leave Corolla. Sometimes I go down south, I'm like, I haven't driven my car in a long time, right? It's it. If I'll go down south for a doctor's appointment, or to drop a kid off at school, or to go to Chapel Hill to see friends.
Yeah. I don't think about it much anymore, but when I moved here, it was a shock to my system because I was a weekend warrior. I was going here, I was going there. And then I think I worked here for one summer. I was working in Duck, and I think I didn't leave. The furthest I got away for about 3 or 4 months was maybe Elizabeth City.
Yeah.
And just to go back up to Virginia Beach to a mall, I was picking the city. I couldn't believe all the people there. It was a shock to my system. And now I don't even think about it.
Well, when I first moved here, people would be like, what can I bring you? I'd be like, okay, honey, yogurt, steel cut oats, go to Whole Foods for me, go to Trader Joe's for me. And honestly, these days our grocery stores have so much. It feels like that. They say, what can I bring you? I'm like, loose leaf tea, got it. Or I guess Amazon chain. If I want loose leaf tea, I can get it delivered to my house, which wasn't true in 2000. It wasn't even close to true.
Right.
And you had to get, so now, not that I want to not leave Corolla, because sometimes you have to leave this town to keep your sanity.
Yeah.
But we'll see. This is going to be my first year as an empty nester. So we'll see. Am I going to become a wild woman? It's a chance I'm going to be. We'll find out. You'll have to check with me next year.
That's right. We'll see what your status is
in
January.
Right. No
see
kidding.
If you've gone
right?
stir crazy.
I might just be
red rum on the door.
Sweet. Yeah, we'll find out.
If again, squirrel brain taking over. If anybody wanted to help the Wave School or donate to the Wave School, is there anything they can do?
Absolutely. So we're just at 1 million of our 1.35 goal,
Nice.
Which again, these are estimates because we have to see what the soil testing says and how deep are our piles going to be. But we did have a donor who gave us $250,000.
Nice.
We are more than happy for somebody to try to match that. That would really, really make our lives wonderful. In the meantime, we have done things like put boxes, like cash boxes, and raffle things off. That sometimes gets you $25 or $100 donation. Is much harder to get to $350,000 of our last bit on the $10 donations for sure. So we are not above coming to talk to people about why our project is a worthy cause.
I have a jar of pennies, and tomorrow.
Thank you. I love it. We actually have kids who count for us. I just need to be clear. They are Sylvia's children, and they are heroes to this town because they count coins.
I know some of these kids.
Yes.
I coached them in lacrosse.
Yes, you certainly do. And then they bring the coins to our gas station who wants coins because there's a coin shortage. I tell Sylvia they are unsung heroes. They watch their movie and they count coins. That's amazing. But pennies are really, we have a wishing well in the lighthouse. And I can tell you, pennies are a very hard way to get anywhere. So we have raffles going on. We really feel like people who are contributing to the infrastructure up here could help us out again, because the county won't, that we're not the public school turned us down. The public school system turned us down. So at this point, we're doing it on our own. It has to be through small donations or big donations, but individuals. So we have a givebutter.com/making waves. That's the reason we decided to go with that is because people can put Venmo and PayPal on there for small donations.
That's right.
If somebody wants to send us $100,000, we would definitely rather a check so we don't lose anything off the top.
There you go.
But yes, thank you for asking. We also have volunteers at our school, right? People just come in locally who are like, hey, I was a mathematician. Oh, I worked for Boeing or not. Or I have free time on my hands and I'm a kid and I wash dishes here, but I don't know what to do in the wintertime and I'd love to get involved, because getting involved in Corolla is an essential if you expect to live here and have your mental health.
Or you will lose your mind.
You'll lose your mind. No, or you will drink so much, or you will turn to drugs. There's an isolation factor that a lot of people think they're driven toward, and then when they find out about it, it's a lot of. There's no point in thinking that much, right? What is the point of life? No one knows.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean, and I try to tell people. I work with a lot of young people in my old business that I sold. And I work with a lot of these young people, and I tell them, it's like, if you want to live here, you better find something to do in the wintertime. I'm a parent of 3 kids. I coach lacrosse. I have stuff. I got stuff. But that single person who has nothing, you're going to lose your mind because there's nothing to do. It seems like you said, utopia. But after a couple months of doing nothing, you're going to lose it.
Oh, and I even think possibly, there's only so much to watch on Netflix at some point, right? Yeah. Yes, you have to have things to do. Or you, and a lot of people do end up being like snowbirds or whatever that phrase is, right? Where they'll go somewhere else in the wintertime. But again, the families with kids can't do that. So those of us here, we were like, we work all summer long, right? I'm at the lighthouse every single day practically in the summer. And then when you have kids, you're here every single day, right? When you're a parent on the Outer Banks, there's no off season.
Right. Yeah. My wife and I, we had corresponding, or I should say, opposing careers. And, she'd take care of the kids in the summer. I took care of them in the winter. And yeah, there really wasn't much downtime.
Right. Kids don't allow for that.
They're on their own agenda. It's funny is I saw this on Facebook years ago. Just a few years ago, and it must have been somebody from, I'm pretty sure it wasn't you, but I think it was somebody from your cohort that posted something on Facebook that said, oh, by the way, this is a working school, so don't come knocking on our door, looking for a tour. And I thought, you guys are missing the point. Here's a great curriculum in entrepreneurial skills. Give them a tour, hand them a broom, let them do some cleaning. We could put them to work, have them take a donation.
Well, it's funny. So we did have someone come by who thought our kids were actors. We love that. Yeah. But actually, there is a skill that we expect our students to have, which is graciousness with vacationers. Again, it's like walking into the lighthouse. Why do you know anything else? You just showed up. Right. You're just looking around. Why would you necessarily know? And we know people on vacation do not read signs. It does. You can, which is why we actually try to limit our signs at the lighthouse. People are like, "You need more signs." I'm like, "Why?" So people cannot read them.
Right. Good one. Excellent. I can relate to that.
Right? Sometimes, but it's true. Sometimes, which is fine. I don't need these jobs to go to automation, right? There's people here
Right.
to be kind and friendly and to help people understand what's going on. So we do try to make sure the students at our school also have some sense of hospitality.
Right. And I kind of, I would, in the training of my business, okay, I used to own water sports. We bombard these people with waivers and safety talks and go this way and do this. We give them tons of information and they're on vacation.
Yeah.
They don't want to absorb all this information. What's interesting though, I'm digressing big time, but the kids, if they have kids with them, the kids will absorb all of it. And I think maybe because their brains are still turned on to absorb as much information as possible, that they're like, yeah, Dad, he said, go down to the end of the pier, and yeah, Dad, you're doing this wrong. Yeah, Dad, you got to sign here, not there.
Oh,
And
interesting. Okay.
Yeah, the kids would absorb everything, and I think the parents, they just want to shut it off and just take my money and get me on my jet ski.
Right.
But very, very fun.
Oh, interesting. That could have been a business plan, which is actually, we used to let a certain age of people in free at the lighthouse. And you'd say, you'd ask the parent, how old is your child? And they'd be like, seven. The kid is 7. The kid would be like, I'm 8, Dad. And so we just stopped asking the parents.
Oh, yeah.
We would just ask the kids, be like,
Same
how
here.
old? Kids do not want to lie. They do not want to be made younger than they are.
And by the way, so this is so funny because you have to be at least 16 years old to drive a jet ski. Never ask the parent. They're going to lie 10 times out of 10.
Yeah, they will.
But the kids would tell the truth 9 times out of 10.
Right, unless they've been
coached.
coached before. Look, here, this is my favorite comic I have. It says, I want my 13-year-old to understand how important honesty is, but also know that she's 12 when kids eat free. It's from some Twitter account, but I have it on my bulletin board over there because it made my whole staff laugh.
Love it. Yeah.
These days you got to be 4 to climb, so we changed that a little bit, and now we know. Are you 4? Nah, you can't even talk. You're not 4. Get in a carrier or you don't go up.
Right. Yeah. And the ironic thing is that there's probably a lot of adults that probably shouldn't be climbing this.
Well, luckily their heads tend to be too big to just fit through any bars. So we worry less about the adults.
I was thinking more of the cardiac arrest going up the stairs and stuff.
Actually, you're not wrong. In fact, we have to tell people you have to climb in front of your children. They're like, in front, that doesn't seem safe. It's because those kids are going to run off on them, right? The kids are like, I'm up. Oh, wait, you're still breathing. You're still on a landing.
Still on the first landing.
Totally.
That's funny. This was a great talk and loved listening to you. Is there anything, as we kind of wrap this up, we can go on a little longer, but if there's anything you want to wrap up, I'm happy to listen to it.
Well, I always like to put in a plug-in for Island Farm, which is the other, what we consider the sister site to the lighthouse. It's owned by the Outer Banks Conservationists.
Which is relatively new.
Yep, relatively new, but now, a decade plus on.
I say
so.
that now.
I know.
Right when I said that, I was like, you know what I thought? So the windmill used to be right next door to my business.
Cool, that's exactly right.
And that was the land. It was called Windmill Point.
Right.
That's where all the windsurfers went. So that was a huge landmark for me as a windsurfer and all the other windsurfers on the Outer Banks. And even the kiteboarders up to a point. And then when I saw it being disassembled in there, I was like, yeah, they're taking it over to Roanoke Island. I'm like, oh, okay, well, at least they're repurposing it and stuff like that. But, and now that when I said, oh, yeah, it's relatively new, I'm like, yeah, it has been
It's
at least
been
10
a
years
while.
since that thing was disassembled.
Yeah, I can't tell if that's life on the Outer Banks or just us getting older, right? We're like,
both.
wait a second, where is this time gone? But right, they put a lot of effort into keeping interesting content. The thing about the lighthouse is people don't want to hear me talk. They want me to shut up and they want to go in the lighthouse. They want the view, they want the architecture, they want the feeling. And we're okay with that. We created this site to give you a sense of place that we want you to be allowed to have, right? And that's true for Island Farm too. But there's so much content. I don't want to say content. There's so many different daily events that happen. They have blacksmiths. They had a cooper there recently, a basket or a, what is the right word for, yes, basket, but
Basket
barrel.
maker
Barrel maker. Yep. Yeah. They have 2 of the Corolla wild horses actually that graze down there that were taken off the beach. So they have a event on the Spanish flu. So they have educational events with a guide that vary day to day. And
Excellent.
we do have a season's pass for the Outer Banks Conservationists where you could come to climb the lighthouse every day if you want. We are open every single day of the year, mid-March through December 1st, with the exception of Thanksgiving Day. So if you wanted to come climb our lighthouse every day for $50, you could do that. And that will also get you into Island Farm. So that's truly the best deal there is on the Outer Banks. And we just
Which is good leg workout too, by the way.
It really is.
Lighthouse.
Actually, you and I haven't climbed. Why don't we do that first? We'll do that afterwards. That's right. Then if you have more questions, we can go back and do this. I can't believe we didn't just knock that out. Right. It's a great leg workout. And in fact, that's the other thing I should put out there, that if there's anybody who really loves climbing a lighthouse, we almost always have docent work for people year round. You can work a half a day. You can work a day. Nobody really works for me more than 2 days because it's a lot of interactiveness.
Yeah.
And I like people to love the vacationers.
Gotcha.
I don't even let people call them tourists. They are vacationers. Everyone likes to go on vacation. Everyone deserves to go on a vacation.
Sure.
And everyone enjoys to, or is allowed to enjoy it. So 2 days is about as most as I want anybody to work here, which means I hire a lot of people because I can have up to 4 people working on at any given time. So both the Island Farm and the Currituck Beach Lighthouse often are hiring. Our school can always put volunteers to work. Yeah. So we'll leave it at that.
Nice. Well, thanks for your time.
Thank you for your time. This was fun.
Excellent.
Once again, I'd like to thank Meghan Agresto for joining me. I think we had a great talk. Full disclosure, I don't get up to Corolla as much as I probably should. And I was trying to think back to why. And 2 main reasons is, 1, it's about a 40-minute drive from my house. And 2, the traffic going into Corolla in the summertime is just insane, and I just feel like I never wanted to join the chaos in that trip. That being said, we took a little tour around Historic Corolla Village after the interview, and it's amazing. It's just so pretty down there. They've done a great job of preserving the buildings. They've done a great job of adding to the area responsibly. It's just a nice area. They got right there, within walking distance, of course, you have the Corolla Lighthouse. You have the Whalehead Club, and next to that you have the Center for Wildlife Education, but you can also go around to some coffee shops, water sports. There's the Corolla Chapel right there. Corolla Wild Horse Fund office is right there. And they're all just on these quiet little streets, nestled in the live oaks and other shade trees. It just reminded me that I need to get up there more often and check it out. If you are in town on vacation or whatever, if you want to get away from the beach and just shift gears for a little bit, I highly recommend you check out Historic Corolla Village, check out the shops, walk around, get a tour, see the museums. I think you won't regret it. I think it'll be an awesome opportunity. It's definitely back on my list of things to do on the Outer Banks, perhaps during the fall when things quiet down a little bit. Before you go, I hope that you check out the website, treasuresoftheouterbanks.com. If you have any friends that love the Outer Banks, please point them in that direction. Check out the articles. I'm constantly adding to the articles every week. Sign up for my emails. Every Friday I send out Ready for the Outer Banks email newsletter. It's kind of my personal observation, local news, and things to do on the Outer Banks. I think it always changes a little bit. I try to put some fresh information out there. And when you sign up for the newsletter, it just shows me that there are people that are supporting it, and I can continue to grow and do more things with it. So try to keep me motivated out there. And until next time, have a good one.